Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Whiskey Wednesday. It's 5 o'clock East Coast time on Wednesday. We're wrapping up the month of September. Hope you survived the fun and games last night. If you saw that debate, well, if you were part of a drinking game, you're probably just waking up about now. So hopefully you survived it well, and we will leave it at that. We will avoid any other political discussions for the next hour or so. This will be an interruption-free zone. We're going to have some fun for the next hour or so with our guests. And let's bring in our friends now. We're going to bring in Una Green, first of all, Brendan O'Rourke, and Freddie Noe. How are you guys doing today?
Hey, how's it going?
Fantastic. How are you?
Great. Freddie, thank you for joining us. Same with Brendan. I brought Una in because we shared an award the other day. I'm going to show you this one, and not to brag, not to boast, but yeah, we got an award. The Tales of the Cocktail Spirited Award for Best Broadcast, Podcast, or Online Series. And that's the plaque. It's out of camera reach right now, safely to where I can't drop it and break it. And that's the general idea, because it is glass and they will not replace it if I drop it like an idiot, which I have been known to do. But the reason Una's involved in this is because when we had to submit an episode for the judges to review, the entry deadline was at the end of February, and we had just talked with you, Una, about your return to Dors after your fight with breast cancer, and that was the last episode before the deadline, so that's the one we submitted, and that's the one that won. So I got to share this one with you, Una. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Oh my God, I'm so excited to share the award with you, Mark, and I was thrilled and so happy for WhiskyCast and all the work that you've been doing over the years. It's so well deserved, and I'm just happy that, you know, I got to tell my story and share it with you guys, because I was never interviewed before. So it was a little nervous at first, and I'm just so glad, you know, we did it. So yeah, I'm doing great. I feel good. I had my blood drawn today. Everything's in line and looking good. So yeah.
That's wonderful to hear. I know that you were, I was going to ask how things were going health-wise, and I know you're living out in Los Angeles right now, and I know you've got to be concerned about COVID, because with all the chemotherapy and everything, you've been immunocompromised. So I assume you're worried about it.
A little, yeah. For sure. It's definitely something that I'm super careful about. I'm always washing my hands, wearing my mask. You know, I'm back at work, so I am out and about in the field. I am out there supporting our bars and restaurants and bartenders that are still open and working and through these conditions. And there's been so much ingenuity and like hopefulness and like really great, like so much like good spirits happening here in LA, you know, despite the situation. I've been just seeing a lot of really hardworking people just making it happen. And I just think, you know, they'll just be, when we come out of this, there'll just be such a huge, even more of an appreciation for what bartenders and restaurants do. You know, I just can't wait for that too, you know. So I can just properly sit at a bar again, you know, just to sit at a bar and enjoy a whiskey with my friends and bring it back.
Well, I know it's the middle of the afternoon out there, but do you have anything in your glass? I know these guys do.
Right now, I don't. I just have water at the moment.
It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon out there. You're excused. And I thought that might be the case. And normally I don't play favorites when I pick a whiskey from among our panelists, but this time I'm making an exception. This is an Aberfeldy you probably have never even seen.
Ooh,
the single cask Bits of Strange Tour from 2012.
Wow. No,
Stephen Marshall gave this to me several years ago. It's a 16-year-old that was bottled for a King Creosote and Found's Bits of Strange Homecoming Tour of the UK. And if you see the tax stamp, it is a UK bottling. So, Una, thank you again for sharing your story with us. And I poured this in honor of you. So,
cheers.
So, Brendan, tell us what you've got in your glass.
So I have some of our 4-grain bourbon. I had family up over the weekend, and I was feeling a bit nostalgic. So I went into the cabinet and pulled out a bottle of 4-grain from 2017 that I had tucked away since we stopped putting that out as a variant, and we're holding on to the juice to put something out special in the next couple of years.
And Freddie, I'm pretty sure I know what you have in your glass.
Well, I got 2 glasses today. The one I'm sure there you go, Little Book Chapter 4. But I've also got a release Old Tub here as well.
Oh, that was a good one.
Yes. So I've got a little bit of both. Everyone assumes I'm going to bring Little Book, so I usually bring 2 glasses, which I don't think there's anything wrong with a couple of drinks in the afternoon. It's 5:07. We're well into the evening here in Kentucky, so.
Before we go any farther, Freddie, how is Little Booker doing?
He's doing good. Growing like crazy, getting his own kind of little attitude. He's really starting to talk. Not saying much as far as words, but he's rambling on and looking at you like you know exactly what I'm talking about, even though you have no idea.
He's what, about 18 months now?
He actually just turned 3 weeks ago, so the 6th of September.
Well, you better keep your dad away from him because I know your dad uses some words you probably don't want Little Booker using. So.
I'll tell you what, whenever Booker's around, he's focused solely on him, so there's not much that gets him stirred up to start using those words. So he's what do you want, Booker? Where are we going, Booker? That's all he pretty much says. So
yeah,
he's all right. He's not going to say him around him because he's not going to get riled up with the little one there. So
yeah, I know. I talked with your dad about being a grandfather and the whole getting ready to start easing things out and turning things over to you thing a few back earlier midsummer or so. Any timeline yet? Because I know he was talking about taking you on a bit of a world tour to start introducing you to some folks in Australia and Europe and everybody as the next master distiller.
Yeah, I mean, we had plans to do some world traveling this summer. Obviously, with COVID, it kind of got shut to the wayside. So, not really a timeline. It's funny he says that, and he says he's ready to kind of ease off into the sunset. But I told him, you can go from going 100, 110. You can slow it back a little bit. You don't have to step all the way away because I enjoy having him around the distillery. I'm sure as the craft distillery is open, he'll want to be around and talking with consumers and guests as they're wondering about. Hopefully when he does kind of draw back, he doesn't go fully away. I think there's still a lot for him to do in the industry and enjoy some more of the time versus be out there kind of nose to the grindstone so much.
Well, let's talk about the new chapter of Little Book, the 4th edition, because this one has some brown rice bourbon in there, and that's got to come as a bit of a shock to some traditionalists in Kentucky that you guys were messing around with brown rice bourbon. Tell us about that.
It's kind of cool. This one, we were just talking about Dad. This one's called Lessons Honored, and it's really about Dad and kind of pays homage to Fred. And, a lot of people compare me to grandfather Booker, but I learned a lot of what I know, about the distillery and a lot of my perception of how Granddaddy did a lot of things in the distillery. It came from Dad. And so I thought it was fitting that this chapter of, I guess, what we call it a chapter now is a kind of play on book. This chapter of this book kind of play a little bit more into the person that ties me back to the big Booker. But so the brown rice is cool because, we had done this, I guess it's probably about 18 years ago now. It was a first distillation, and Dad really was involved with that with Jerry Dalton, and Granddaddy was still around when they were talking about it. And what this was an experiment, and we removed the rye grain, which is our flavor grain at Beam, and we replaced it with variant grain. So we did, in this case, brown rice, triticale. We actually did a wheat, a red winter wheat. We did a high rye as well. I guess that's all of them.
That reminds me of that 6-grain signature that your dad did a few years ago.
Very similar, very, very similar time frame of distillation. And just really, like I said, we were trying to get curious as to if we did innovate, I guess, at that time, very early in the years of bourbon being, I guess, accepted again in the early 90s there. So that one was very well received. We released them at 11 years old under the Signature Signature Series Harvest Collection, what it was called. It was very well received. It was Dad's favorite. And so we thought it was going to be our first kind of redistillation. You know, we've done the Booker's Rye once. We've since done that as well multiple times. But doing this particular brown rice, I went down. Dad was traveling, so I got a chance to kind of own this project. I went down to Arkansas, helped harvest the brown rice, learned about the grain, its breakdown, and a lot of its uses, and really started to understand that this was probably going to be more in line with the wheat style bourbon than the rye with the spice. It's a much softer grain. But the one thing that I was grew to liking about this brown rice is, you know, I've kind of nurtured it. It's 5 years old now, actually. Right before we dumped it, or excuse me, right after we dumped it, it turned 5. So this is 4 years, probably about 9 months, I think, if you got down to the day. But as it grew from that age, I think if you taste it by itself, you would see that it really picks up a lot of barrel flavor. So the vanillin, the vanillas is coming through early for a very young age, and I think it drinks much more mature. So that's why I chose to use it. It kind of, as I said, it had a tie to Dad and myself. It was the first project he kind of let me go on my own with from start to finish. And it's the first time you've kind of seen that distillation of it. And so it was kind of fitting. It fits in with the one for Dad. The other two liquids, one being that actual Booker's High Rye mash bill that I spoke of a while ago. That is the 8-year rye component. The 7-year Kentucky Straight Bourbon is a Knob Creek liquid stream. And this one's really close to Dad. It's the first time I've ever let anybody pick a component of Little Book. With it being an honor to Dad, I guess I'd say, you know, I pretty well trust his palate. So I thought I'll kind of blindly taste him on some different barrel strengths from 6 to about 10 years old across much of our portfolio. And he's always said Knob Creek's his baby, and it kind of shows it. A little bit younger at the age that he chose, but I think these barrels are extremely unique, and they really popped after we analyzed them for being extremely high in that vanillin and caramel flavoring. So it's really right in line with what Dad really likes in his bourbon, and I think it really kind of grounds this blend. You've got a lot of spice coming through. With that high rye or higher rye. I guess it's not a high rye in today's world. There's a lot, 100% rye, 80% rye. So a higher rye, I guess would be the best term. Got a lot of spice coming through, picking up some of that sweetness from the barrel. You got this brown rice that's really adding this different element. It's got almost like a fruity, estery note that's coming through on the aroma. But this bourbon that Dad kind of picked out really kind of balances everything out and rounds it. It kind of grounds the blend, and I think makes everything play together very well.
Brendan, I want to point out your new, because you guys completely just updated your entire line. This is the Bright Lights Big Bourbon, which is a revamp of your original straight bourbon at Hudson. Tell us about this one, because I love the labeling on that, because that's the New York City subway typeface, as close as you can get without a trademark infringement. But
yes, we took a lot of influence from New York City subway for our bottling revamp on the labeling and the design for it. Liquid itself is very much baby bourbon at its heart. We've same mash bill, same team, same barrels. We're just aging it out to 3 years rather than 2 years. A lot of it has to do with, William Grant coming in and focusing on capacity of the site. We were putting out every drop of whiskey that we were making previously. So it wasn't something that we could do to hold on to the liquid to age it out past 2 years. Now that we have the production capacity and the warehouse capacity, we're actually putting this stuff out and letting it sit for 3 full years before anything touches the glass.
I want to also ask you about Backroom Deal. This is one where your partnership with Grants has really sort of come into play here, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. So Backroom Deal was one of the first innovations that we started working on after the site was acquired by William Grant and Sons. And it's playing homage to Scotch whiskey. It's some of the first barrels that I tipped when I started at Hudson. They were sent over and used for Elsa Bay, one of their micro oxidation lines. Then they were sent back to the site, and we used them to finish Manhattan Rye, or now or Do the Rye Thing, in those barrels. And total age on the liquids sitting around 6 years for our peated component and 3 years for our rye component.
And then there's another one, and it's called, you renamed the rye, Do the Rye Thing.
Yes.
You guys going to hear from Spike Lee's people on this or what?
Everything has gone through legal before we put anything out, but definitely leaning into our New York background. And, you know, you want to play up everything about New York. You can't go wrong with leaning into Spike Lee.
Never hurts. But what else are you guys working on? Because this is just really the first rebranding and the first redesign since Ralph and Gable, the Orenzos, and their partners really started things off years ago.
Yeah. So really, this is the first of many for the site. So we are pushing through innovations on a yearly basis now. We're working on things that are going to be coming out, 10 years from now. We really are going back to the roots for the site where it was innovation. And we kind of lost that for a little bit, and it's now been brought to the front of our focus. So that's everything that we're going to be doing is, we'll have our core brands and we'll have the liquid that everybody loves, and we're gonna put some twists on that I think that everyone's gonna have opinions on, but I think they're going to be good ones.
And I should point out that we have some smart Alex in our audience out here. Chris Ratcliffe is already giving us a name suggestion for your next release, the Upper Yeast Side.
We'll put it in the box for consideration.
Okay. Chris, you do not get royalties on that if they pick it. Nor do I. Una, what else have you been working on these days? I've been to run tastings out in LA with social distancing and masking and everything. Are the bars just, I know the bars have not really started to come back yet, really, have they?
No, they haven't quite yet, unless if you serve food, then, and if you have like a patio or a parking lot, then, you can capitalize off of that space. The city lets you spread out on the sidewalk and the street in certain areas. I have ran some live tastings, socially distant. They'll give me a microphone. I'll be next to speaker and, just kind of doing my thing and answering questions from the crowd and kind of guiding them through the tastings that way. I've also been doing a lot of virtual tastings also. I have one coming up with the 7 Grand Whiskey Society next week. We're going to be covering Craigellachie and Aberfeldy. So doing more virtual things has been really neat, putting kits together for the crowd. Like it's really, it's been fun to put together little delightful kits for consumers to enjoy. So it's been a lot of fun in that regard. And then on the horizon for Aberfeldy, we have 2 new releases coming out for the holiday season. We have an Aberfeldy 18-year that is aged in a Pauillac cask from Bordeaux, and then we have an Aberfeldy 20-year that is aged in a Sauternes cask. So we have like these really 2 really unique finishes that are coming out, and very excited to see them in market. Yeah.
It'll be fun to see what those taste like, because I have said for years, whenever I get somebody asks me for a recommendation for a good, easy drinking Scotch whiskey or single malt for a beginner, the Aberfeldy 12 has always been one of my go-tos, just because it's light without being overpowering. It's not too sweet, not too floral. There's no peatiness to it, and you can drink it and get started and use that as your entryway into much more complex malts, but you can still, I still go back to Aberfeldy 12 and enjoy it all the time.
I'm so glad you love it. I love my Aberfeldy 12. It's just so approachable and lovely, and it's complex in its own like simplicity as well. It's very much, there's no peat. It's light and fruity. It is very much, if someone is afraid of, that Scotch being too smoky or too peated, or, there's that assumption that all Scotches are smoky, but it's not true, as you know. So this one is a really nice one for people to just kind of dip their toe in, try out the category. You won't get any of that iodine, Band-Aid, old man peat, on Aberfeldy whatsoever.
Careful.
Yeah. Oh, you know what I mean, Mark.
I know. I'm kidding. Tabitha, our pal Spirit Bomb, commenting on the Hudson, I believe. A redesign I actually like a lot. So many recent Scotch rebrands have been less than inspiring. So it's only been out a week or so, Brendan, but you're already getting good reviews from there. Chris Radcliffe has a question for Freddie. How on earth do you track to inventory so carefully in such large production? And do the barrels that you pick for Little Book come from the usual Jim Beam stock, or are they filled and stored separately? Now, obviously, a lot of those whiskeys were made long before you guys came up with Little Book. So how do you pick those barrels, and how do you manage all that inventory? Because it's probably well more than 1 million barrels on stock, right?
Oh, yeah. Much more than that. We've got a pretty large team that works with our inventory. It's a cross-functional team of myself. We work with our blending team, which is comprised of I guess 3 folks now, or soon to be 3 folks that are helping us to batch the products. And so through that kind of cross collaboration of those teams, and we also have product development in there as well. We've got a pretty good eye on everything that's out there. We also have a computer system that tracks it all. We've implemented in the last probably 6 years. That's pretty easy to determine what you're looking for. If you've got an idea what style of whiskey, whether it be bourbon or rye or sometimes this experimental stuff, it still falls under those categories. You can even look up some of those smaller runs, particularly by themselves. So there's a pretty large team that helps us go through the inventory and picking the barrels for Little Book. It comes from stock from a lot of our products. The last one was some overaged stock of Bakers, Bookers, regular stock of Knob Creek, and a little overaged stock of Basil Hayden. The second one was a little bit of a draw from our Canadian distiller, with 2 of the liquids coming from that, and then also some of our Knob Creek rye aged to 8 years. First one was corn whiskey at 13 years old. That one kind of slipped through the cracks, and with that new computer system, I don't think you would see that happen without me maybe earmarking some barrels to allow them. It helps us keep a better storage, but essentially those barrels kind of fell through the wayside. We had used corn whiskey at a much younger age. Luckily for me, they landed at 13 years. And similarly with the malt whiskey, we just ran some experimentation, and kind of fell through the wayside, and I had an opportunity to use up some of the stock. So it's just a combination of me working with those folks that help keep care of the inventory. This year I kind of had an idea. I wanted to go in a direction with something I had touched as a product, something Granddaddy had touched with the high rye, and then something that I let Dad physically pick the liquid on. So it just kind of depends on which batch. Each one is kind of went a little bit differently about how I've chosen some of the liquids and approached it.
Now, I'm kind of curious here because I know that your granddad used to be able to hide barrels down in Boston, down at the what's now the Booker Noe Distillery. He was able to get away with stuff down there that nobody knew about within the company. And you can't do that anymore with this computer inventory system, can you?
Well, there's a couple of things that I've got in the warehouse that were maybe accidents that happened in the distillery, and thought maybe, oh man, we're gonna have to dump it, but some accidents happen and good things come from it. So I've got some holds. So when they go to dump some of these barrels, it'll be blocked with my name reserved, and they'll have to come say, hey, why do you got these barrels blocked? And it's labeled as one particular thing I'm thinking right to head is labeled as Jim Beam. But there was a kind of oopsie daisy, and there's a couple other things that might have got in that same tank. So it pops up and we're going to dump this. They'll say, why does Freddie have a block on it? And then I'll tell them, well, something happened here and it's actually special. So it does happen, but I still try to keep those close to my heart so that not everyone can get in there and see that it's happened. But But luckily, we got the craft distillery coming up here next year. We're going to open up the Freddie Noe Craft Distillery, give us an opportunity to kind of, we've scaled so big with Jim Beam being the world's #1 bourbon, and the growth. It's funny. I was doing a Zoom call the other day, and someone asked about why I continue to call the Knob Creek, the Bookers, the Bakers, and the Basil Hayden the small batch collection. And I laughed and I said, now that's a very industry-wide term that's used. But essentially that kind of originated right out of my granddaddy's mouth when he started talking about what these 4 whiskeys were. So yeah, it's great to have the opportunity to get back to that smaller size and be able to distill things that it's not maybe necessarily a big bet. If I pull a lever right now, some of those whoops, if they don't taste good down the road, they could be a pretty big dollar loss for us, or it could damage the integrity or quality of our brands if we wanted to go on and try to just slip it through the cracks. But we don't do that, so I'd be facing a pretty large bill sitting on my desk if I went to the distillery and started tweaking things like Granddaddy did back in his time. But this craft distillery will give us that opportunity to kind of have some tinkering time, as I say, and learn a little bit more about America's native spirit.
And we have a question from Chris Ratcliffe for you on that front. You mentioned the distillery that they're naming for Fred, the craft distillery that's being built, the craft little micro distillery that is part of the tour now. Are you guys using that at all for experimental stuff, or is that just the 1 barrel a day of bourbon that you're just sort of laying that stuff down?
1 barrel a day of bourbon. Essentially, it's just Jim Beam mash bill bourbon. We've actually removed that part from the tour now and are kind of revamping that area. And so with the new craft distillery, you'll have another opportunity to get closer and hands-on, where we'll be actually making production of products and also some of that experimental thing. So right now it actually happens just down that hill on the tour in the Claremont facilities, which is our smaller system. So that's where all those experimentals would be done right now.
Our pal Donner Pass Whiskey says, after having a bottle of Aberfeldy 12, got a bottle of Dewar's 15, and could pick the Aberfeldy out of it right away. And explain, Una, because I know Aberfeldy is sort of the fingerprint malt in most of the Dewar's range, right?
It is, yes, it is. It is definitely the heart of Dewar's, and the Aberfeldy distillery itself was built by the Dewar sons, John and Tommy. So it is also the spiritual home of Dewar's as well. But yeah, you'll find Aberfeldy within our blends. And it's definitely a shining star for sure. The 15-year was Stephanie McLeod, our master blender's baby. It was like her first, true expression that she nurtured herself, and it was meant to be released. It was developed for the Asian market initially, and that's another fun tidbit about the 15-year. But yeah, I'm glad you could taste the Aberfeldy in that. It's just it's always just around the corner. And speaking of that, I joined the party, gentlemen.
Yeah, we saw that.
And so
What'd you pour?
I poured. It's a first fill sherry cask, Oloroso sherry cask from Aberfeldy that I filled myself 2 years ago.
Oh, nice.
At the distillery. It's a 57%, and look how dark it is. It's just it's a sherry lover's dream, which is myself. So I just opened this actually a few weeks ago to celebrate my birthday. So yeah, I thought, why not have a little
enjoy.
Cheers, gentlemen. We have a lot of fun with our casks here at Aberfeldy. Sorry to jump on you.
Andrew Clark has always been a Hudson whiskey fan, but loves the new older liquid and the new packaging. And he wants to hear you talk more about the new range, Brendan. What went into creating an all-new range, and how much input did the folks over in Scotland have into this? Because I know, for instance, Brian Kinsman likes to play around with some of the your North American whiskeys within the portfolio from time to time. How much input did Scotland have in this?
So with this relaunch, it definitely was a collaboration between the site and the UK. It's definitely been a focus of ours to try to get the age statement on Hudson up for years now. And it really took, the time it did to get us to this 3-year-old mark. And it wasn't just like, all right, well, we have one variant that we can get up to 3 years. We need everything up to 3 years old. It's been real good influence on the site having a big backer like William Grant, and just the amount of knowledge that they have, hundreds of years of blending experience is just not something that you can get as a craft distillery without partnering with one of these companies. The age range and the liquid itself is definitely driven from the site. All of the blends are still done by the guys that have been doing the blends for the last 10 years. This is nothing that's like completely shocking to our customers. This is the same baby bourbon Manhattan rye that you loved. We just kicked it up a notch.
How much input have they had into your innovations and the stuff that you're working on for the future?
Innovations have been coming from the site. We've been driving a lot of that. We definitely get some more influence from them in terms of the availability of getting new things. So casks that we definitely wouldn't have been able to get our hands on, we can get now. So stuff that we have laying down that's 2-3 years out, and casks that, as a craft distiller in New York putting out 100,000 proof gallons in a year, would not have access to. And these things have come over, and we've gotten some really interesting juice out of these casks. So we're really looking forward to showing those out to the world. You're going to have a little bit of time to wait on getting those, but Backroom Deal is the first one that we put out. That's our play with Elsa Bay, and we've geared it towards the American palate. So we've dialed back the peat note on that one. If we just went with straight peated cask, it would definitely have knocked your socks off and killed the palate pretty quickly. So we've dialed that back with our rye base, and really have geared this for bartenders to play with and people that enjoy peated whiskey, just to get something completely new.
Freddie, I want to go back to sort of your family history right now, because I don't think we've ever talked about this. What do you remember about your granddad Booker growing up in terms of whiskey terms? Because I'm going to admit, I never got to interview Booker. We didn't start the show until about a year after he'd passed. So I never got to meet him, never got to talk to him. And that's one of the big regrets I have. But for those of us who never got to meet him, tell us about life with Booker.
It was a sitcom, essentially. I mean, away from the distillery, he was always into something. He was always tinkering with something, trying to fix. He was catching the rainwater off the house. He had a little fish pond. He was trying to grow bluegill in, but it wouldn't work for him. Turned it into a goldfish pond. He just liked to feed the fish and watch them eat the food. But so he had this elaborate plan to catch all the rainwater and fill his fish pond with. And just things like that every single day. It seemed like always something crazy going on that he wanted to do. But as far as whiskey, I've seen some videos of him talking, as well as, remembering him talk a little bit. He had kind of quit doing a lot of the seminar things probably when I was 13 or 14. So I do remember a little bit, and seeing him talk about it on a video, it really spurred a lot of memories for me. And I guess a lot of it was how much he was confident in that people would enjoy bourbon if we could get it in their mouths. It's funny to say that now. This is probably a video in 1994, 95, as bourbon was just kind of not a totally unpopular thing, I would say. It wasn't really till the early 2000s that it kind of came around. But to know that he knew that the flavor that we were getting in the whiskey and in the bourbon more particular, that it would resonate well with people. It was just about getting them, getting that whiskey in front of them, getting in front of them, getting it in their mouths, and educating them on why bourbon was important. James Bond came along, and martinis became the new thing. And bourbon, from listening to Granddaddy talk, had become your granddaddy's drink or a cowboy's drink, where you kind of belly up to a bar, you've been riding across the desert, and you throw down a shot, and you grimace, and it's only for tough guys. And that's not really the image we wanted. I would say nobody would want that image. But so getting these super premium whiskeys with this small batch collection out there was something Granddaddy really wanted to do, because he knew it was going to help the growth of the industry and help to educate folks that bourbon was a flavorful alternative to cocktails at that time. And now you see a lot of cocktails that predominantly had maybe clear spirits in them. You see them being used with American whiskeys like rye and bourbons. Like one of my favorites is a Bloody Beam, which is just a take on a Bloody Mary, and you replace it with Jim Beam Black. It's a great cocktail, and so it's great to see. And like you say, growing up, I didn't really think that, I just thought Granddaddy was really talking about what he was passionate about. But seeing what had happened with the industry, I didn't have any idea. I just knew what he was talking about. I had no idea what was going on in the world outside of ours, and very little at that time. So knowing now what I was kind of listening in on and seeing, it's kind of great to kind of see it all come to fruition and be able to have the opportunity to release something like Little Book, which kind of stems from his idea of flavor exploration, and kind of extend that on and help to continue, hopefully, the growth of the industry. It's not just about growth for us at Beam, for me and for us. All ships rise with the rising tide. So as long as we're continuing to deliver on unique flavors and stretching people's flavor imagination and making their curiosity continue to grow, I think hopefully the industry will continue to go in the way that Granddaddy kind of carved the stone and started that tradition of going for us.
Did you ever have any choice but to go into bourbon?
I did. It's funny, when I was probably right before he passed, so he passed when I was 16, I was probably 11 or 12. He had said, "You'd be a good lawyer, boy." I didn't know he was kind of making fun of me because I was joking, because I was arguing with him. He was joking, but I was arguing with him. He said I'd be a good lawyer. And then I'd seen lawyers driving nice cars, so I thought they got to make good money. I said, hell, if he's thinking I'm going to be a good one, why not be a lawyer? Then I found out you had to go to school for eight years, and if you've heard Dad talk, it took him 8 to get out of with a 4-year degree. It took me 6 years and a semester. If I was going for my law degree, I'd probably still be in school. So that went away pretty quick. But no, as a child, it was all about being a child. The distillery was like a second home, a place to fish, take my dog and let him play fetch while Granddaddy talked with folks, talk with some of the fellas. I grew up with a lot of the men and women I worked beside. Some of them have seen me since I was Booker's age. My son, who's 2, as we talked about earlier. And then some of them have started when I started, and we catch up at the lunchroom table and stuff. So it's great to have that range of folks that, our employees are very near and dear to our heart. And so being able to kind of have that connection with all those folks is great as well.
Well, your dad has talked about his academic experiences, using that term loosely, at Western Kentucky, and Booker getting the notice before Fred got to it that he'd been expelled after that first semester. You ever have anything like that happen where Fred caught you out on something?
Yeah, it happened. I had some issues in one semester and had some bad grades, and they had sent a letter saying that I needed to come have this meeting, and I hadn't attended it yet, and the semester had started. I was going to have the meeting, and he had never seen the tuition come in or any of my paperwork come in, so he was like, this damn boy ain't going to school. So my plan was, I'm going to school, have the meeting, and then get my classes lined out. Well, he had circled around before me. I guess he left, go to the distillery. Circled around before I guess he was still sitting in the parking lot and seen me go in and have the meeting. They told me, I'm going to have to wait and get a delay on start of the middle part of the semester. And so he called me like 10 minutes after I got out of this meeting, and I was actually riding back to town. I was going to get some lunch with my buddies, figure out how the hell I was going to spell this out to him. And he's like, where are you at? And I was like, well, I'm on my way to town. You at class? I said, well, I just left there. He's like, well, I'm still sitting here. Why don't you come back over here? So then he caught me. No letter, but physically caught me on that one. But yeah, we didn't school. It's kind of funny. I guess I knew at that point I wanted to be in the industry, and to me, school was a distraction for me kind of getting into what I was going to be doing. Obviously, I learned some valuable knowledge in school, but at that time, I was thinking, I'm trying to make whiskey. I want to, learn the ins and outs of this. And to me, any day that I was 21, which is what the requirement is to work at Beam, any day after that I wasn't working there, I kind of thought of it as, this is a waste of my time, and it kind of built up on me, and it just, so I kind of slipped, and then after that I got everything together, and that was it. But he did catch me there.
The statute of limitations has expired on most of that stuff
Right,
now, I think.
right,
Yeah.
Right. It's somebody asked me the other day, what's the best part of working with your dad? And I said that he's not checking my report card anymore. I said, our relationship is so much better as a working relationship, talking about things we both are passionate about, versus him trying to make sure I'm getting A's and B's. So that's funny.
Petehead has a question for you on that Aberfeldy Una. Is that natural color, even for a cask-strength sherry matured? It seems very dark.
It is. Yeah, it is the natural color. If I hold it up to them, it's straight out of the cask. It was such a cool experience to do, and then dip the bottle in the wax. And yeah, it's very dark. It's dark because it's a first fill sherry barrel that was used. So yeah, it's pretty incredible. It tastes beautiful, and the cask really comes through. You taste the wood, you taste the sherry. It's very rich, and you've got that, the cask strength. So I threw a little water in there and just a couple of drops to ease it off a little bit, just like ease it up. So. Delicious.
Jacob Shedder says he needs to get his hands on some more of that Hudson Shortstack. Are you guys still making that, Brendan?
Yeah, so Shortstack is our revamp on our maple cask rye. Rye whiskey finished in barrels that were used to age Vermont maple syrup. So not a sweet whiskey, just looking to take that edge off that rye and dial back that spice note.
And Tyrone Cote, our pal up in Nova Scotia, wants you to tell us, Una, about the Dewar's Double Double series. I know you focus on the malts. How much do you know about the Double Doubles?
The Double Doubles, I know they are award-winning and all delicious. I got to personally try the 32-year PX Cherry Cask, which is stunning. And as being a sherry whiskey lover, I definitely recommend that 32-year PX Cherry Cask. But yeah, they all three were award-winning. Also a very special project of Stephanie's also. She definitely innovates and loves to play around with different barrels, and constantly is just, she really has a huge job because out of my single malts and Dewar, so I have 5 single malts that are behind me. There as a Devon, Craigellachie, Altmore, Royal Brackla, as well as Aberfeldy. And she also has Dewar. So in terms of, distillery character, to her job, blending for each distillery and then combining it all into the Dewar's blend to keep that character alive, like through time, through the years. It's just a huge job to do. So yeah, I'm just so excited to be able to work underneath her and be able to reach out anytime I have questions or any kind of advice in this industry. So yeah.
I think I have a little bit left of the 21-year-old that was the Oloroso cask.
Beautiful.
I've been hanging on to this one, so we'll have to try to get some more of that. Also, our pal Sailor Guevara from Uncle Nearest. So happy to see your smiling face, Una. You got a lot of friends around the industry, and a few of them are watching tonight.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for your support. I've never, this past year has been insane with the amount of support and outreach that people, some people I haven't talked to in years, people that I've worked with over, my career. I've been a bartender for a very long time. That's been my background. And getting into brand work has only been within the past 5 years. So, bartenders from all over the world that I've been so lucky to sit in front of, and hopefully I'll be able to do so again someday once COVID's all done. But I feel very lucky for that. Yeah. So hi guys. Thank you for tuning in.
Why did you make the switch from working bars to being a brand ambassador? Because you had access to all those great whiskeys before. Now you've got access to a few great whiskeys.
I think it was just a natural evolution for myself. I will never, the bar is always in me, and I love being creative with my brands that I stand behind entirely, and I absolutely love to play with these guys and to create drinks with them all. So I still get to do that, just in a different capacity. And I also, what I love doing especially is teaching the younger generation of bartenders, that are coming up and that are curious as to what they're pouring, how it's made. I'm passionate about that, and I really like to share that with others and get them really excited about what they're doing, because there's so much, I find so much pride with bartending and, being in the service industry and taking care of people. It's a big responsibility, and I don't think everyone can do it. I think it's a really special skill to have, and I just think I appreciate, what bartenders do and what the service industry does, and I can't wait for the return and for all of it to rise again. So.
Brendan, you made the transition from within the hospitality industry to distilling as a chef. Tell me about that transition and what you learned from it. It helps you make whiskey today.
Yeah. So being the fact that, I went to the top culinary school in the United States, it's definitely given me the confidence that I know what good is. You learn right off the bat that you can't start with bad ingredients. You have to start with the best ingredients that you can get in order to make great food. And it's the same with whiskey. You got to start with the best raw materials that you can get in order to make sure that you get the best whiskey out at the end. And you're not talking about making a dish that comes out, 15, 20 minutes. You're talking about whiskey that's aging for years and years. And if you don't start with great products, then you're never going to have a great product at the end. My palate is definitely what I lean into, and it's something that I've refined over the years, and knowing that I have a good pedigree behind me gives me the confidence to put out whiskey that I want the country to taste year after year.
We had a question also that came in. You sort of addressed this a little bit, but from Chris Ratcliffe, the investment injection that Grants has put into Titletown makes it possible for you to come up with all these new product ideas. What do you want to do? What would you like to do that you haven't done yet to expand the range?
Yeah, I mean, for me, for expanding the range, it's going back to our roots and playing with the grains that go into the whiskey. We definitely lean heavily into single grain usage. So our bourbon whiskey is 95% rye, or 95% corn, 5% malted barley. Our rye is 95% rye, 5% malted barley. We've played around a little bit in the past with what other single grains can do, but that's going to be the big lean for me, is pushing these, single grain whiskeys coming out that's, 95% malted barley, and then playing around with that other 5%, 95% wheat, playing around with that other 5%, and really looking for what New York State farmers have to offer. So partnering up with co-ops in the area and seeing what they can put in the ground for us and get special grains coming out at the end.
Are you doing the Empire Rye Project?
Yeah, so we were one of the co-founders of the Empire Rye Project. We every year we put out a release. Every rye whiskey that we have out now, including Backroom Deal and Shortstack, are Empire Ryes. So we're really leaning into New York State and ensuring that we have our own flavor type that's out there.
And our pal Tyrone writes that you must write great tasting notes, Brendan, because your flavor appreciation and vocabulary
would be extensive. Crumpler, bartenders do the Lord's work while dealing with a dumbass populace.
I love Crumpler's, everything that you're typing is making me laugh. Like, he's like, it's as dark as my soul, this bottle.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
And Chris Ratcliffe has a question for both of you, Brendan and Fred. How do you know new make is good coming off the still, especially if it's something you've experimented with? How much trust do you actually put in time and wood to do the grunt work if the spirit isn't perfect coming off the still?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, some of the work that Granddaddy did, that some of the forefathers even before him did, of kind of tweaking our system and really honing in our distillation system, I have a lot of trust in the system of which we're using. There's a lot of different levers we can pull within that, and that's a lot of how we make a lot of our different brands. But when we go into making a new make, whether it be something we're maybe just trialing a different way of running the distillation, or trialing something of a new grain, knowing that the natural setup of our still produces a decent distillate of many different grains, it's easy to kind of go into that with that thought. And then I think you just, as Brendan was saying, you have to lean into your palate. I really like hearing that he come from a different background. Someone recently asked me why I thought our family was so good at distilling and had a great eye. It's very similar, except we came from the farming side. Jacob Beam was a farmer, and essentially all of my family since before 1795 up until my grandfather Booker, he wasn't a farmer, but prior to him, all owned a farm and had cattle to feed our byproduct to, and many other things. And Jacob was particularly a grain millwright, so he saw a lot of grain, and that eye for good quality ingredients right up front, I'm sure, came to the forefront for him very quickly in that early time. So,
Brendan?
Yeah, so I'm gonna piggyback off of that. Is definitely knowing your system is playing a big part of it, and knowing what is going to come out is consistent with other products that you've done in the past. For us, some of the experimental stuff that we do, we get to play around with some smaller barrels. So we do see what that oak influence is going to do at a quicker time frame. Also with that, as you're going through some of these projects, you can lay this stuff down, and within a short period of time, you can start to see what the oak influence is doing on that liquid. It's just going and nosing and opening up that cask and just seeing how the liquid is interacting with the wood. And you can tell, all right, this is going to be great, or this is going to be okay, and we can do something else with it.
I think, to that point, if you taste something at 6 months old and it's pretty good, I could promise you in 4 or 5 years it's going to be damn good.
Yeah.
Good question from Dave Kuhn here. Is bourbon new make or white dog spirit similar to scotch in that you could shake it in the glass, put some water in, the way Jim McEwen does, and if it goes clear right away, it's the middle cut? Your guys are dealing with column stills, and this is sort of a pot still method, but how do you know when it's the middle cut? Because you guys aren't really taking cuts, are you, off of the way that a scotch still would be off of a pot still, where you're physically turning the handle on the spirit safe to divert the spirit over?
Yeah, for us, we run continuous column, as you said. We recirculate all of our heads and tails. So we have a tank we call the heads and tails tank, but essentially it's where we send all of our distillate up until startup. And then once we get up to our temperatures on our still that we know runs close to our system, we then start to let that whiskey trickle on through the system. And then we still circulate back into that heads and tails tank. So we never at any beginning or end of run have any kind of throwaway or have heads cuts or tails cuts. We essentially run this column up to temperature, diverting everything to this tank and redistilling it through. Actually have a stripping column we use in our system, along with a doubler, and we've also got converters, which are distillation vessels in it. So there's a lot of different areas where this whiskey is having copper contact and phase change from liquid to gas state, and it's cleaning up all along the way. So essentially, a lot of our stuff is we're diverting it all into this tank and then diluting it out throughout our run.
Brendan?
For our site, we're double pot distilled for everything, and we're really leaning heavily into the training that we give to our team members. They're picking up the switch from heads to hearts organoleptically, so they're smelling and tasting everything as it's going through. Yeah, we have density meters to check to make sure that the proof is within the right spec, and they have pretty strict guidelines that I've set through for them as to what we'll accept for a good heads and tails cut. But in the same fashion, we're not pitching anything. Everything gets recycled back through. So we're blending back in our heads and our tails into our low wines before we're going back through and doing our rectification run.
And let's explain, Freddie, what the doubler is, because it's like a pot still. It's how you do a second distillation run, essentially, for our folks outside the U.S. that aren't familiar with this process.
Yeah, so essentially there's a chemical equation I won't get into, but as you're feeding the whiskey into the top of this doubler, you're essentially, what we're doing in a lot of cases is bumping the proof up 10 proof points, sometimes 5 proof points, and up to probably 15 on some things we've done before as well. So this vessel, as the liquid's coming in the top, it's also flowing out the bottom and going to this stripping column from the bottom. Most of our product is going out of the top. Obviously, a very low proof water solution essentially is coming out the bottom, going through the stripping column. And so that doubler, so essentially we'll come into the column, we go out of the column, and preheating the beer, you get reflux. From that beer heater, it's going into that converter that I was talking of, which is a vessel where you'll have some fallout. We recirculate that back through a retention tank. Getting very technical here, but yeah. So essentially, the doubler acts as our second distillation vessel. There's many phase changes in and out of there that happen, but because of how we're distilling, that 10 point or 5 to 15 point proof jump is how we're doing that.
And once again, our smart Alex, beer giving reflux, typical. Yes, beer does give reflux. Our pal Sergio's at the Irish Whiskey Magazine says, we need more Bookers in Ireland. I don't want to hear any complaints because you guys get a version of Booker's that isn't available in the States. You guys get the export version of Booker's, right, Freddie?
That's exactly right. You're exactly right. So the first batch we do of the year is actually the export batch each year. It's a little bit bigger batch than the rest of the Booker's batches, but to your point, it is the export batch. So the export market is the only one that gets in on that particular batch. But I would say, to answer that question, we need more Bookers. I think everyone would say they need more Bookers, not just in Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, there's no argument there. We can always use more Bookers.
Right.
Una, how much did you know about bourbon before you got into how much appreciation do you have for bourbon? Well, I know you work for Scotch, but
I love bourbon. I love all whiskey, really. I think, I had the pleasure of going to Kentucky a few years ago and touring. I toured Woodford. It was actually for the Woodford Reserve competition. That's also how I got into the brand world. Also, I started competing a lot as a bartender when I ran my bar. And so, getting to meet all sorts of, brand ambassadors, different companies, going on different trips, and just, experiencing that really, it kind of led me through into the transition into the brand world of stuff. So, but I love and adore bourbon. Thank you for what you do, gentlemen. It's all delicious. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to give you a chance because among the competitions you've been involved with is Speed Rack, and I know that's really close to your heart. And they haven't been able to do any of the Speed Rack competitions the last few months because of COVID, which has really sort of put a dent in their fundraising for breast cancer research and care. You want to talk about Speed Rack just a little bit, just to give them some love with Lynette and Ivy and the gang?
Always. I mean, those are my girls, I got involved a few years ago when I, as an ambassador, I was part-time with Saint Germain. I was also bartending. I went to my first Speed Rack competition as, a viewer. And because I was always nervous about actually entering into it. obviously, because it's very high pressure. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm so glad I did, because I really gained a sisterhood because of it. Made a whole lot of new friends in the process, and, you know, surprised myself when I made top 4 when I competed for the West Coast. You know, and then from there on out, I became a coach after that. And it's been really rewarding. I love to train the new girls that are up and coming in LA that are interested in taking part in the competition, because I just think it's just such a beautiful cause, what Lynette and Ivy have put forward. You know, they're just so strong, and to have their presence in our community is so important. And to, you know, just to be strong women in our industry, it's just, I love them and what they do, and I just appreciate everything that they did for me. And also with the Helen David Relief Fund, they helped me a lot last year as well, and it's a USBG organization that helps bartenders and women and men in our industry that have breast cancer, and they are incredible. And they also weren't able to do their typical fundraising this year also. And that's something that with October and Breast Cancer Awareness Month coming up next month, tomorrow, I'm hoping to help change that and to help raise money for them here on out. You know, they're my charity of choice, and I'm going to be trying to help them as much as I can.
And we should explain, Sergio's asked, what is a speed rack? It's a competition for women bartenders that is literally being held all over the world now, right?
Yes, yeah, it's now expanded, you know, throughout, you know, they're in Asia now. They've gone to Mexico. They hold their finals. They did hold their finals in Scotland one year, you know, and it's it's a speed bartending competition, kind of ran March Madness style, where you have the top 8 fastest female bartenders in that region, and they literally go head to head, and you know, in pairs of 2, and you have to kind of knock each other out each round until there's a winner. Yeah, and it's intense, because, you know, you get cocktails thrown at you by the judges who are, you know, luminaries in our industry that we really admire and look up to. So it's a lot of pressure, and you have to do it as fast as possible and as accurately as possible. And so it's a real test of your skill and speed pouring or jiggering, whatever. You know, I did a bit of both, because I usually jigger, you know, because of accuracy. But, you know, when you see on the periphery the girl next to you kind of kicking your butt, you're just like, okay, speed pour, let's do this. You just make it happen, make it taste great, make sure, you know, you're on point, and yeah, it's fun.
And Sergio said we need to bring that to Ireland, and I'll put you in contact with them, Sergio. So we'll see about getting a speed rack in Ireland.
Speaking of Ireland, Irish Whiskey Magazine, Teeling. Mark, I acquired Teeling into my portfolio just a few months ago. So now I have all the Scotch and Irish whiskey, and it's really amazing.
And as Tabitha points out, lots of Teeling in Una's place. She obviously has good taste.
Thank you.
Well, guys, we have managed to distract everyone for more than an hour thank And I want to thank all 3 of you for joining us, plus all of our listeners around the world and our viewers. So Una Green from Dewars, thank you, and Sláinte, and good health to you, and keep in touch with us. Let us know how you are.
Congratulations on your award. I'm so excited.
Our award. You shared it with us. Brendan from Hudson Whiskey. Brendan O'Rourke, thank you, and we'll talk to you again soon. And hopefully I'll get up there one of these days when COVID sort of lets us get back around. And Freddie, give your best to our dad. Keep him safe. I know he didn't want to wear masks too much around Bardstown, but keep the old boy safe and keep him out of trouble, okay?
I see him walking by the window outside, so he's probably wondering how it went. He knew I was getting on here with you, Mark. So I'll get.
Well, he had a standing invitation to join you, and we couldn't get him in here. So
he was out there blowing leaves. He's probably cussing me because I scheduled this and he was blowing leaves. So I'll get out there and get to helping him.
Okay, well, go help him, and we'll talk later. And then in a few years, you can get Little Booker running that leaf blower.
Right, he'll run the leaf blower so I can watch him.
Okay. Hey, thanks, guys. Take care of yourselves.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Cheers to everybody, and we'll see you on Friday night for our happy hour webcast. Once again, that starts at 5 o'clock New York time, 10 p.m. London time, 2100 GMT elsewhere in the world. Take care of yourselves. Be good to each other. And if you're debating someone, please don't interrupt. We'll talk to you soon. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Cheers.